Are you ready to take control of your wealth and design the life you envision for yourself and your family? Welcome to Wealth of Insight with Austyn Whittenberg from Whittenberg Wealth Partners. Austyn guides you through the entire planning process to help you build a plan that seeks to protect your financial future. He empowers you with creative investment opportunities and planning ideas to help you understand and achieve your long-term goals. It's time to gain confidence in your financial future. Now, on to the show.
Welcome back to the Wealth of Insight podcast. I'm your host, Austyn Whittenberg, joined by Wendy McConnell again today. Thanks for joining, Wendy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So we're going to talk about something that's been in the news recently, and that is Americans and their debt. Now, I'm not talking about the country. We just survived this debt ceiling crisis as a country, right, where Congress had to basically say, well, the country can spend more money on Social Security and other things. Now we're approaching the second debt ceiling crisis, which is Americans as people, as individuals. So wanted to spend some time talking about that today. And I've got a few interesting statistics here that we spoke briefly before this. And I would imagine a lot of people now have seen the headline of that Americans are now carrying $17 trillion in debt as people. So that's
not just me.
Not just you. Yeah, I know you were about 16 trillion of that, but the rest of us, we made up the other trillion. Yeah, which is a staggering number, right? But if you divide that per household, the average household has about 101, just shy of $102,000 in debt per household. So it gets to it. Now that's still a big number, but that when you look at it on a per household basis, now it's still the highest or among the highest it's ever been. But 17 trillion, I don't know, to me seems like that's a number. I can't even calculate or comprehend a number that big.
It's a lot.
100,000 is an easier number to talk about, right? So, and they go through and they break that down. If you look at credit card debt, it's $1 trillion. And, there are good types of debt and bad types of debt, right? So typically buying a home is a good thing. A mortgage, I would consider to be a good type of debt. You're buying an asset. Credit card debt, on the other hand, is about as far to the other way as you can go, right?
And very expensive.
Yes. Yeah. That's, when you're paying anywhere between 17 and let's call it 24% interest, it's hard for me as your advisor on the investment side of things to earn more in your investments than what you're going to pay credit card, right? So that 1 trillion in credit card debt, that's a pretty staggering number. I was surprised though, if they break that down to the average just revolving credit card debt again per household, and that number was only 6,000. I was actually surprised. I felt like that number, I expected if there's $1 trillion total, I expected that average to actually be a little bit higher. But
the good news there.
Yes. So good news there, because that is the most damaging, certainly the most damaging type of credit card debt. Well, we'll talk payday loans and that kind of, that's probably really the worst kind of debt, but that's a very small subset of people who go that direction. A few other things that I found interesting, just from a statistics standpoint, is they looked at average mortgage debt per household. So the average mortgage balance was $237,000, which again seemed low. So I started doing a little bit more digging there and thought, okay, well, those, some of these people are going to have had mortgages for 20 years. There's obviously a large segment of the population with no mortgage. So I went to the Mortgage Brokers of America and looked at what's the average new mortgage going for. And this peaked back in 2022. It's come down a little bit here recently, but the average new mortgage is $425,000. So the average outstanding, $237,000. But for people who are buying new homes, that number has jumped up quite a bit. And that it's not at its all-time high, but again, it's close. We've seen real estate, obviously the last few years has gone on quite a run.
Yes.
Everything's more expensive. And so that mortgage number is peaking up. So if you look at average mortgage payment, again, is only $1,487 for the country, but that new payment is almost $1,000 more. So because of this rise in housing prices as well as interest rates, the average new mortgage payment is just north of $2,300. So
Wow.
we're starting to see some of these things. There's, I guess, a few logical explanations of now why we have $17 trillion in debt total. A big chunk of that is certainly going to be real estate. And with prices going up, mortgages are going up. And that's the same actually in cars. So if you look at, there's about $1.5 trillion of outstanding car loans out there. The average loan balance being $22,612. But similar to real estate, new car loans are $41,445 is the average. And again, that number seems a little low because you hear about cars now and you look at any SUV, and I swear you can't buy an SUV for less than like $70,000. I was surprised to see that. But again, everything's just gotten more expensive recently. And so all this debt we're bringing on, people are bringing it on at higher rates. This is why it's starting to make headlines again.
Mm-hmm.
We got high debt, high credit card debt, mortgages and car loans. Those are at higher rates than they've been at for a long time. Just something to be cognizant of as we're starting to see debt start to appear on for clients. And, again, just these statistics here, it's now part of the conversation of how do we make sure we're taking on good debt versus bad debt. Again, right, if you're buying a home, student loans, I think to a certain point, there's some value in student loans from a debt perspective, and a car, you got to have something to drive, but making a reasonable choice there because of where interest rates are and what car prices are. Just making sure it's something that needs to be more to the forefront here. Whereas the last few years, let's say, and even prior to COVID, interest rates were so low that people were taking on a lot of debt and it wasn't really that much of a factor. That's changed, right? Mortgage with interest rates, all that kind of stuff. It now is making a bigger dent in people's pockets. So that's what I wanted to talk about today is if you're struggling with debt, you're finding your credit card balances are starting to increase. What do you do? How do you get out of that? And how can you get back to a better place so that you can continue to achieve your other financial objectives, right? We just talked about credit cards really there with the interest you're paying there versus what your investments are going to get. You're going to be upside down if your credit card balances are higher than your investment accounts. Right. That's what we want to try to help people avoid.
So help me out.
Okay.
I pray to a fairy godmother to come and wave her magic wand.
You hope that there's an uncle out there that dies and just leaves you money, right? That's the new American dream. Yeah. Well, let's gambling. We're not going to condone gambling on this podcast. So, or I don't know, maybe the Nigerian prince is going to reach out to you. Just watch your emails. You never know. You might see something there.
He's always trying to contact me.
Okay. So if you don't have an uncle that you didn't know about and the Nigerian prince didn't reach out, here's some things we can do. Right. And we've talked on this podcast a little bit where, I wouldn't say that I'm a huge budget person to the point where every person needs to have itemized, here's exactly how much I'm going to spend. I think it's really beneficial for you to know that and know at least in general, hey, here's what we're spending each month. So when we're doing forecasting and planning with our clients, unless they keep a detailed budget, some people are just like that. Like I said, I'm personally not. I don't have here's exact, but I know in general, here's what I'm spending, right? But if debt is becoming an issue, budgeting is the first place that you need to start. Right? So there's really only two ways you can start to pay down your debt. That's you got to earn more money. So if you want to start driving for Uber on the side or something, I guess you could do that. Most people either don't have the time or willingness to pick up a side hustle like that. So the second option is spending less money. And so that's really where getting into your budget, really creating for yourself item by item. Hey, here's how much my mortgage is or my rent. Here's what my car payments are. Here's what I'm spending on food and gas and, all those things, just so that you really have a sense for exactly what you're spending. Right? So there's this general rule of thumb from a budgeting standpoint. It's called the 50-30-20 budget. What that means is you want to keep your essential expenses like housing, as part of essential. Food to a certain extent, right? Your groceries, that kind of stuff. Food's sort of this interesting category where it's, you got to have it to live, but you also can't go to Ruth's Chris and buy $100 steak every day either, right? There's this balance there.
Mhm.
So 50% essential, 30% for your wants, your Netflix subscription, your whatever. So those sort of things you want. And then 20% of your income you would be either saving or paying down debt with. So that's a general rule of thumb. Not everybody's going to fit to that, but that if you're struggling with debt and you can't figure out why your credit cards aren't coming down, this is a great place to start. Break it down, see where your money's going. And that allows you, again, maybe you can see some things that are there to cut out. I don't know if you're much of a podcast listener, Wendy, yourself, but a lot of the podcasts I listen to, they're all getting these ads now from companies who will analyze your bank accounts and find all the subscriptions that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see which subscriptions you're paying for that you're not using, right? Some of those things are a good place to start.
I have a question about the 50%. Is that feasible now with the amount that we're paying in mortgages and the inflation of food prices?
Yep, that's a really good question. Food prices and things right now, I do think it's a challenge. And even, we are seeing clients who are applying for mortgages and things. Everybody is getting right up to the limits of what even mortgage companies will allow you to borrow from as a percentage, right? So I think it's still a reasonable objective. I do think it is definitely more challenging today, and it is a tough thing, especially for if you're buying a new car, you've got to get a new house. It's going to be a lot more difficult than people who were able to lock in their mortgages and things at lower rates. So
right.
It is, that's why I'm saying this is a general framework. I don't think it's going to be perfect. And I do think it is going to be challenging. And quite honestly, for people who are struggling with debt, they're probably blowing through that. Well, and it maybe isn't the 50% that's the issue. It's probably more that 30% for wants. That's the issue, for most people. So that's a long way of saying, I do think it's still possible, but it's definitely a lot more challenging in 2023 than it was in 2019, just as with the way things have increased. So that, like I said, that's the framework. As you're building your expenses, you want to try to put them in these buckets to just try to get to that general allocation there. And 20% of savings, we always talk with clients, a great place to at least start with 401k or anything, on average, if you really want to retire in the future or achieve your financial goals, saving 20% of your income is probably going to be a necessity. But at a minimum, you want to get to 10% that you're saving. So then you can get 10% saving, and this extra 10% is going towards debt. Now, again, if it's credit card debt, we may want to say, well, let's cut off our savings here a little bit until we can get this credit card debt under control. So some of that depends on the type of debt that you have. But really what you're trying to find here as you categorize your expenses is, how can I make sure that I'm paying more than the minimum payment on my credit cards? If we're talking credit card debt, because that's where a lot of people get into trouble. And I think people just don't understand the math. And the credit card company is not your friend, right? They're trying to make money. They're not trying to help you buy things. They're trying to make money off of you. So the first really strategy we want to make sure people are doing is make sure you're paying more than the minimum on your credit card. So I have a little example here. So if you have a $15,000 balance on your credit card, and that is at a 17% interest, which is actually on the lower end of some of these consumer credit cards, and you just pay the minimum payment, they're saying that minimum payment would be $450. So if all you do is pay the minimum payment and you don't spend any more money on that credit card, it will take you almost 4 years to pay off the whole thing, and you'll pay $5,500 in interest. So those $15,000 outstanding balance, it would cost you $20,500 to pay off that $15,000. If you just paid $100 more per month, so $550 per month instead of $450, you can pay off that debt in less than 3 years and pay only $4,100 in interest. So, almost a $1,500 savings in interest.
Big difference.
Just by paying $100 extra per month. Now, again, hopefully we're in a position, or we want to get to a position where we can attack it a lot quicker than that. But if it's gotten really out of control and you can't just pay an extra $1,000 a month because it's just not there because of what we just talked about, where everything else is so expensive, you still got to have somewhere to live. At least paying down more than the minimum starts heading in that right direction. And we can help clients. There's a number of calculators out there. I'm sure if you just Googled credit card loan calculator, you could see, hey, if I do this, here's what my credit card balance is. If I pay this much, here's how long it'll take. If I pay, you can run through those different scenarios. And once you've budgeted, you can know exactly how much extra you have to do that and start making some progress there. Certainly there are some things to consider, maybe like cutting up your credit card so that you can't keep adding to it. That's easier said than done because you still have to live. Again, reality is that you need to buy things. But if it's just always this revolving cycle, you're just paying interest your whole life. And if it's at 17%, you're really going to be behind the 8 ball. If you're trying to save for your other financial goals as well. Again, once we've budgeted and we know sort of what our payments are, have you heard of the debt snowball? Is that a concept you're familiar with?
Yes.
So it's I think when I was doing some research for this podcast and I Googled what's the best way to get out of debt, there was like 30 options. But the debt snowball is the one that I see the most common, and I think it's the easiest one. And there's some good behavioral pieces to that. So you can get feel good about yourself and good about your progress. So momentum. In general, yes, some momentum. That's a good word, right? So for those that aren't familiar, the debt snowball, you take a look at all of your debts, and I'm sort of going to exclude mortgage from this. Again, I'm excluding good debt from this conversation. We just want to look at bad debt, and car debt, I think, sort of kind of in the middle, but we'll include our cars here. And then this is where I talked about, right? If you have payday or title loan type debt, you want to forget all the other stuff. That's what you got to go after first, because those are really predatory and you can get it, really outrageous interest costs by doing that. So what you'll do with the debt snowball, you line up all the debt that you have and look at what are all the minimum payments. So, and then the strategy here is you want to pay minimum payments on everything except for your debt that has the lowest balance. So let's say you have $10,000 in student loans, you got $5,000 on your credit card, and you got $1,000 left on your car loan. You're really close to paying off your car. You line those all up, figure out what the minimum payments are. And then in this instance, because the car loan was $1,000, it was your lowest balance, you throw everything extra you can on that loan to get that one paid off as quick as you can. Once you've paid off the lowest one, and here's your momentum that you were saying, right? You feel good. Hey, I paid off an outstanding debt. Then you, again, keep paying minimum payments and just move on to what's the next smallest balance and throw your car payment plus all the extra. Now, in this instance, it was your credit card to get that knocked down. And you slowly just snowball, like snowball rolling down a hill, growing bigger and bigger, right? Until you're able to get all of your debts paid off. Now, again, excluding the home. Homes are really, it's not necessarily a snowball effect, but something important to think about with the mortgage. There's a really interesting strategy that people don't really think about. Hopefully most mortgage brokers are talking about it, but it fits sort of in the same category. So bad debt, let's get the snowball going, make some progress, knock out the debt. With your mortgage payment, something that's I think you can do relatively painlessly, but can make a really big difference on your mortgage, is by switching to paying every 2 weeks instead of once a month. Essentially what that means is you're making one extra payment per year on your balance. And that one extra payment per year can cut a 30-year mortgage down to being a 17-year mortgage. So it can make a really dramatic difference in how much interest you pay.
I actually did that. And you have to make sure that you're on the same page with your lender, because sometimes they don't allocate that the way that you're intending for you to allocate it. So
Yeah,
make sure that you've discussed this with them.
Thank you for that. Yes, because you want to make sure when you're doing that, it's going directly towards the principal, right? Yeah. And so if you're doing it without that, it's not going to have quite the impact that you're hoping for. So that's a really good point to bring up. But that can be, again, if we're talking just about ways to save interest, making that one extra payment, and you can do that. I have clients who do that by actually writing one extra check per year. You can do that by dividing your payment up by 12 and just paying a little bit more each month. Whichever way is going to be easier from a cash flow standpoint. But I wanted to throw that in here in the Snowball portion because that is a similar type concept there for the mortgage.
And what a big difference, right? From 30 years to 17. That's
insane. Isn't that crazy? Just that one extra. So if we go back, the average, just to try to put this in perspective, if that average new payment on new mortgages is around $2,400, that's an extra $200 per month you'd put to your mortgage, right? That's going to cut almost it almost in half, right? Which is just, it's crazy to think how little, and now again, $2,400 a year is not a dollar is a dollar, every dollar matters, but that's a relatively insignificant amount to cut your mortgage almost in half.
Agreed.
So that's one of the tried and true financial topics we've talked about a number of times on this podcast, but time being your biggest friend and just starting early. All of those things can make a huge difference. Okay, another option out there, if you're in a position where you go through your budget, you just realize, hey, I'm in real trouble here. My credit cards have gotten out of control or whatever it may be. I'm not going to be able to do the Snowball, or it's not going to be feasible. Another option out there will be to refinance your debt. Now, this has become a lot more challenging recently because interest rates have gone up. So refinancing hasn't looked quite as attractive, but you can still look. There's a number of places out there that you can get what they call like a debt consolidation loan, or even things like a lot of credit cards will offer, no interest on a balance transfer for the first year or 18 months. Just looking, how can I take this debt, especially that credit card debt that would be at double digits, 17 to 24, I think is about the average. How can I move this block of money somewhere else for a lower interest rate so that my payments start to make a bigger difference? So balance transfer credit cards, I do think can work. They're a little wary to me from a behavioral standpoint. So what I've seen with people is they balance transfer off of one card to the other that has no interest on it, and then they just run up the balance on the bad card again, right?
Yeah.
So if you're doing that, you really want to, there's a lot of behavior management on you as the individual, or
that's not going to help your debt problem.
Right. Yeah. It just compounds it. It just makes it easier for you to spend the bad debt again. Right. But if you're really serious about this, you've budgeted and okay, I've got this much extra per month I can start throwing at my debt. You find a credit card balance transfer that you can move your 10,000, whatever the number is of credit card debt, over onto this new card with no interest. You just want to make sure you can get that loan, get your balance paid off before the end of whatever promotional period they have. Because for the most of the time, for most of those cards, they will accrue all that interest over that time and tack it all on at the end, or at least a portion of it if you didn't get it all paid off in time. Right? So again, the credit cards are not your friends. They're not trying to help you. They're trying to make money, and they're preying on this bad human behavior that we're talking about, essentially, right? But if you can get it over there, get it paid off before that time, you're now using those credit cards to your advantage. And a lot of the times with, what you'll see with those promotional balance transfers is roll it here and we'll give you $500 credit, we'll knock off $500 off the top or something like that. So if you can find a card that will do that for you, again, you can use it to your advantage They just know, unfortunately, most people can't. Most people screw it up in the end, right? So I do think that's a good option worth looking at. And then there are a number of, I know American Express, for example, will offer like a personal loan or to help you consolidate. And they're certainly more interested in consolidation because they're still going to get their full value, as opposed to maybe the most drastic next option, which would be you can get on the phone, whether it's with them or hire companies to help negotiate and settle your debt for less than you owe. So again, that's sort of the last ditch effort when you're in a position where I've got no other options. I'm not going to be able to do this. You can negotiate with, and again, this applies probably mostly to credit cards, but you can negotiate with those companies to settle your debt for a lower amount than you owe. If you just know, hey, I'm never going to make this. And that, again, back to the credit card company, if you're in a situation where you're never going to be able to pay them back anyways, they're going to look for they're going to want to get something rather than nothing. And you may be able to use that to your advantage.
Okay.
But that's not something personally I've had to help clients through. I know it's an option out there, so it's not something I'm super familiar with. The debt consolidations loans, we've helped clients through that a number of times, just consolidating everything and getting them on a better cash flow plan. But that last option of settling, you'd want to work with someone. There are a number of companies out there. I'm sure some reputable, some not. You want to do a little bit of research there, but to help with that. And, the last thing really is if the Snowball, that's really going to be the easiest, best place to start. We see that work a lot with clients and helps you, again, just feel good about the progress you're making. The refinancing is a great option, settling potentially if you're in that position. And then the last thing is just figuring out a way, whether it's avoiding lifestyle creep. What I mean by that is if you get a tax refund or you get a raise or your uncle does die, right? We joke about that, but inheritance is a real thing. Just making sure you commit that to your debt before you blow it on something else, right? Get yourself into a position where you're not strapped, you're not just having that debt way over you. So I wanted to throw that out there that, we want to make sure you do, if you're serious about getting out of debt, you've budgeted just mentally, and maybe it takes a year or two to get fully out of debt into a position that you want to be in. If you can just mentally commit yourself to those windfalls going towards the debt, as opposed to something else, again, you can knock those things out a lot quicker. And then now you can get back to sticking to that budget and building in now some more. Once we've done the 50, 30, 20 and you've paid off the debt, you want to keep that 20 as savings and debt instead of now your 30% of wants goes to 40. And now 2 years later, you're back in debt and you got to do it again. Right. So sticking to the budgeting really can, we want to make sure if it's an issue for you that you stay on that path and that we build that into your overall financial plan. So if debt is something that you're struggling with, you can't figure out what to do, you don't know where to go for help, we are happy to help. It's something a lot of these things, right? I can't pay off your credit cards for you, but we can help you create a plan to get out of debt and run all this calculus for you, look at the different options and see what's going to make the most sense for you. So you can reach us at our website, wittenbergwealth.com. Feel free to text me 801-839-7056. As always, thank you for listening, and remember to share with your friends and family and hit that subscribe button.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth of Insight podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Stratos Wealth Partners, a registered investment advisor. Stratos Wealth Partners and Whittenberg Wealth Partners are separate entities from LPL Financial. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Whittenberg Wealth Partners. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.